When Princess Alexandra quietly arrived at Kensington Palace, no one expected the storm she would unleash. In her hands, she carried a velvet box sealed since the Queen Mother's death one that held more than just jewels. It was a declaration, a warning, and a power move that would send tremors through the royal family. And she handed it directly to Catherine, completely bypassing Camilla. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The air inside Kensington that afternoon was thick with unspoken questions. No aides were summoned. No ceremonial protocols followed. Alexandra entered with the quiet authority only age and lineage could command. The box she carried, wrapped in burgundy velvet and bearing the faded insignia of the Queen Mother, hadn't been seen in over 2 decades. Its existence had faded into legend, known only to a select few. Catherine's expression reportedly froze when she was handed the box. Whispers later said her hands trembled. She was not prepared for what she was about to receive, and neither was the rest of the monarchy. Alexandra's decision to bypass the formal channels sent immediate shockwaves. No word to Charles. No courtesy message to Camilla. Clarence House remained in the dark as one of the most personal treasures of the Queen Mother changed hands. Inside the box were not simply heirlooms, but pieces privately kept away from the royal collection, necklaces worn during wartime broadcasts, a brooch from her wedding day, and even a tiara believed to have been worn during her early tours as queen. These weren't just ornaments. They were symbols of legacy, of burden, of rightful succession. And by handing them to Catherine, Alexandra wasn't offering a gift, she was transferring belief, power, and alignment with the future. Catherine, usually composed, was reportedly overwhelmed as she carefully lifted each item from its resting place. One aide described the moment as so silent you could hear her heartbeat. There were no photographers, no fanfare, just a passing of something far older than the family itself, trust. When news of the transfer reached Camilla, it wasn't through the palace but through a back-channel call from a staff member at Kensington. Her reaction? Shock, swiftly followed by rage. According to palace insiders, she had assumed those jewels, if ever released, would be hers. Instead, she was sidelined, erased from a private history that mattered more than titles or protocol. For decades, the Queen Mother's private effects had been locked away, their destiny unclear. Some believed they were lost. Others believed they had been absorbed into the official crown jewels. But the truth had been hidden all along, sealed, and protected by a promise between 2 women who understood that power in the monarchy wasn't always decided by blood or law, but by trust and timing. Catherine had received more than relics, she had received a signal. The kind of signal that bypasses ceremony and hits straight at the foundation of who the monarchy should stand behind. But this act wasn't a spontaneous show of affection, it was a strategic maneuver years in the making, tied to a secret pact hidden within royal bloodlines. Long before Catherine ever walked the gilded corridors of royalty, before she slipped the engagement ring onto her finger, and long before Camilla stood beside Charles with a crown upon her head, a secret pact had already been sealed. Not in writing, not in public view, but in hushed voices and iron-bound trust. It was a private vow exchanged between Princess Alexandra and the Queen Mother, 2 women forged in the crucible of war, bound by a shared belief that the crown was more than ornament and tradition. It was soul. It was legacy. And above all else, it must be protected not from enemies without, but from betrayal within. That pact, once thought to have faded into memory, had now re-emerged like a ghost, haunting the very woman it was designed to keep at bay, Camilla. Their bond ran deep, Alexandra and the Queen Mother. It was built not on ceremony but on survival. Together they navigated the shadows of World War II, the heartbreak of abdication, the challenges of modern monarchy. It was during those long, candle-lit nights in Windsor and Berkeley that a common vision was born. The monarchy must not be diluted by ambition masked as love. The Queen Mother held a stern belief succession must be shaped by integrity, not convenience. And that belief became her compass, especially when Charles's personal life began to spiral into scandal and defiance. Alexandra had watched it all unfold, not with scorn, but with certainty. She knew the Queen Mother would never want the crown's intimate treasures, its emotional lineage, falling into hands that once fractured it. When Catherine stepped into the royal sphere, something shifted. Quiet, composed, never overstepping, she reminded Alexandra of the values she and the Queen Mother once defended so fiercely. Even before the engagement, Alexandra had taken notice. While others questioned Catherine's background, Alexandra saw discipline. While tabloids sought scandal, Alexandra found stillness. She watched how Catherine handled pressure, how she never chased the spotlight, how she understood the silent weight of future duty. It was not long before Alexandra spoke privately, noting, "She carries the same light I once saw in Elizabeth." Those weren't idle words. They were the foundation of a coming storm. Camilla, however, was never able to shake her label among the old guard. To many, especially Alexandra, she wasn't simply controversial, she was a symbol of fracture. Alexandra never forgot how the Queen Mother had grimaced at the thought of Charles marrying her. The Queen Mother's feelings were never formally recorded, but they were repeated in private, always with a firm undertone. Camilla could never be trusted with the crown's emotional history. And that history included not just titles and jewels, but sacred items like the very box Alexandra would one day deliver. The Queen Mother's intentions were spoken aloud only to Alexandra, and Alexandra carried that verbal will like a sacred oath. So when the moment finally came to act, when Catherine was poised and Camilla stood empowered, Alexandra made her move. Not out of rebellion, but obligation. She had sworn to protect the crown's integrity, even if it meant going against Charles, even if it meant crossing Camilla. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask permission. She opened the vault of secrets, unlocked the sealed velvet box, and bypassed every official channel the monarchy held dear. Because this wasn't a gesture, it was a mission. Yet, as Alexandra prepared to honor her vow, a storm brewed behind palace doors. Camilla had already discovered whispers of the plan. When Camilla learned of the box's contents and its recipient, she didn't stay silent. Witnesses say she stormed into a private royal chamber, demanding answers and claiming those jewels were rightfully hers. But what she didn't expect was the wall of silence that met her, and the growing power Catherine now commanded. The clash was not just emotional, it was volcanic. Camilla, consumed by disbelief, confronted Charles with a fury that shook even the most stoic of palace staff. According to sources close to the inner circle, her voice cracked with rage as she demanded to know how Alexandra could go behind their backs. Her argument was sharp and personal. As Queen Consort, it was her right, her entitlement to inherit what once belonged to the Queen Mother. But Charles, trapped between a promise made by a trusted cousin and the firestorm unfolding before him, found himself paralyzed. He knew Alexandra's decision was not spontaneous, and reversing it would mean challenging a sacred vow made to his grandmother. The silence between Charles and Camilla spoke louder than any decree. In a desperate bid to regain control, Camilla turned her wrath toward the institution itself. According to leaked memos, she insisted that the dual handover be excluded from the court circular, the official record of royal engagements and activities. A quiet censorship attempt meant to suffocate the story before it could take flight. But it was already too late. The palace, once impenetrable, had cracks running through its marble floors. Someone inside, an aide perhaps loyal to Catherine, or simply fed up with the manipulation, leaked the details to a trusted contact in the press. And once it hit the blogs, the whispers turned into wildfire. Across royal offices, battle lines began to emerge. Senior courtiers who had long admired Catherine's steady rise began rallying behind her. They saw in her what they once saw in the Queen Mother, grace under fire, and the ability to unify through humility rather than domination. Meanwhile, Camilla's allies shrank into the background, aware that any move now would only appear retaliatory. The balance of soft power had shifted, and in a monarchy, that shift is often irreversible. Attempts to enforce a media blackout failed miserably. Speculation flooded tabloid front pages. Royal watchers dissected every clue, and even international outlets picked up the scent of scandal. Camilla, once protected by her senior status and Charles's affection, was now cornered by a force more potent than title public sentiment. And worse still, Catherine refused to engage in the drama. Her silence made her appear untouchable, and her growing mystique only fueled the storm surrounding Camilla's descent. What began as a confrontation between two royal women had now spiraled into an existential crisis for the institution itself. The crown jewels of legacy were no longer just ornaments, they were declarations of loyalty, echoes of intention from monarchs past. And Camilla, despite her position, found herself on the wrong side of that legacy. With no official retraction, no apology from Alexandra, and no support from Charles strong enough to reverse the damage, Camilla was left to watch as her grip on influence slowly unraveled. But Camilla's public reaction would pale in comparison to the private moves being made behind the scenes moves that would change the line of symbolic inheritance forever. Catherine didn't ask for the jewels. She didn't need them to prove her worth. But their arrival marked a chilling truth: she was no longer just the Duchess of Cambridge. In the eyes of the old monarchy, she had become something far greater, the chosen vessel of continuity. There was no public ceremony, no flashing cameras or official statement, just a quiet presence, a stillness that said everything. When Catherine accepted the Queen Mother's private jewels from Princess Alexandra, she did so not with fanfare, but with reverence. That restraint, that elegance, didn't go unnoticed. Within the House of Windsor, the gesture was interpreted for what it truly was: an endorsement from the oldest corners of the family, a recognition that legacy flows not through crown alone, but through character. Her choice to wear a single piece from the collection during a private family service at Windsor, while Camilla remained conspicuously absent, was no coincidence. It was Catherine's silent acknowledgement of the moment's gravity, and a subtle tribute to the Queen Mother herself. In hushed tones behind palace walls, senior royals began referring to her differently. Not as Kate, not even as the Duchess, but as something far more telling the future. Her conduct, the way she carried the weight of duty with quiet confidence, was drawing a sharp contrast to the turbulence that had surrounded Camilla for years. There was no need for declarations. The shift was happening without them. Whispers of symbolic ascension filtered through the corridors of royal residences, whispered behind locked doors. Even Charles, caught between the two most powerful women in his life, reportedly referred to Catherine's composure as regal beyond title in a private remark to a foreign diplomat. That comment, leaked within days, only fanned the flames further. Publicly, the sentiment began to crystallize. Media outlets, once obsessed with Catherine's fashion, now spoke of her presence. Social posts, opinion columns, and even official biographers started drawing deliberate parallels between her and the Queen Mother. Both had once been outsiders. Both had endured storms of scrutiny. And both had emerged not as victims, but as symbols of enduring strength. It was no longer about marriage or protocol, it was about lineage of spirit. And in that regard, Catherine had quietly stepped into a space Camilla could never claim. Her influence over William's inner circle grew with an almost magnetic force. Advisors, aides, and strategic consultants began aligning themselves with her worldview, one centered on tradition, transparency, and emotional intelligence. The quiet restructuring of influence was underway, and Camilla knew it. Every closed-door meeting, every missing invitation, every reshuffled engagement bore the fingerprints of a new kind of power, one that didn't shout, but echoed. And with each passing week, the whisper turned into certainty. She's already our queen in spirit. But even as Catherine quietly took the crown in hearts and minds, a shadow loomed. Camilla wasn't done, and she was prepared to retaliate through back channels. Desperation breeds strategy. While the world admired Catherine's growing poise, Camilla assembled a covert circle. Codenamed Operation Obscura by insiders, her mission was crystal clear: undermine Catherine's rising influence by reviving old secrets and stirring new divisions. At Ray Mill House, Camilla's private sanctuary far from palace ears, she began hosting secret gatherings. Not royal dinners or formal meetings, but hushed war rooms where only her most trusted allies were permitted. Among them, an experienced PR fixer with a reputation for turning tides in tabloid battles, and a pair of loyal aristocrats who owed Camilla their place in royal proximity. The strategy was bold, but murky: cast doubt on Catherine's perceived perfection and resurrect forgotten fragments from her past to fracture her public image. Anonymous sources began quietly feeding tips to lower-tier media outlets, allegations about Catherine's early courtship with William, rumors of familial tensions, questions about her ambitions. But the plan crumbled just as quickly as it began. The media didn't bite. The few stories that did surface were met with swift backlash from the public, and more critically, from palace staff who quietly vouched for Catherine's unimpeachable loyalty to the firm. Frustrated, Camilla turned inward to Charles. Behind closed doors, she demanded a reaffirmation, a public show of unity, a press release, an image, something to re-establish her position not just as queen consort, but as the monarch's rightful partner in legacy. But Charles, now walking a tightrope between loyalty and legacy, refused to take the bait. He insisted neutrality. And in doing so, he said everything Camilla feared most: her position was no longer assured. Her influence was now conditional. It was then that a letter leaked. A confidential message from Camilla to key palace advisors, marked private and urgent, found its way into a journalist's inbox. In it, Camilla warned of a dangerous imbalance of power threatening to destabilize the equilibrium of the monarchy. Though never directly naming Catherine, the subtext was unmistakable. The leak was devastating. Royal watchers dissected every word, seeing it not as a call for stability but as a veiled attack. Headlines blared accusations of internal sabotage, and Camilla's already waning public image took another devastating hit. Still, she pushed forward. Behind the scenes, Camilla leaned heavily on longtime allies, those who had served the crown through decades of scandal and reform. She called in favors, urging them to publicly back her, to issue statements of support that could rebalance the narrative. But one by one, they declined. Not because they were disloyal, but because they saw which way the winds of the monarchy were blowing. Catherine wasn't just winning hearts, she was commanding them. Camilla's efforts, intended to destabilize, were having the opposite effect. Her aggressiveness, her desperation, only underscored Catherine's quiet dignity. Operation Obscura, once intended to be Camilla's secret weapon, had turned into a cautionary tale. In trying to dim Catherine's light, she had only illuminated it further, and within palace walls there was a growing sense that Camilla was fighting a battle already lost, not against a person, but against the future. Her moves, once calculated, now reeked of fear, and fear in the monarchy is a fatal weakness. But while Camilla plotted in the shadows, someone from the monarchy's forgotten wing was preparing to shatter the silence and tip the scales forever. Lady Sarah Chatto, Princess Margaret's daughter and lifelong confidante to Alexandra, broke decades of silence with a single line whispered at her. Royal luncheon, Alexandra wasn't acting alone. What followed was a series of revelations that would expose a multi-generational alliance and bury Camilla's hopes once and for all. For years, Lady Sarah had remained a silent observer, loyal to the legacy of her mother and grandmother, keeping out of the crossfires that often consumed the modern monarchy. But as the storm over the Queen Mother's jewels escalated, and Camilla's quiet campaign to reclaim control grew more brazen, Lady Sarah could no longer stand idle. Her confession, delivered almost like a passing remark, sent a shock through the room. Those closest to the crown quickly understood what she meant. The handover of the Queen Mother's private collection to Catherine was not a rogue gesture. It had been planned carefully, deliberately by a trio of royal women long before the world even knew Catherine's name. The so-called line of preservation wasn't born in rebellion, but in duty, a mission to protect the heart of the monarchy from compromise, even if it meant going against blood. Alexandra, Margaret, and the Queen Mother had foreseen a day when legacy would be vulnerable to manipulation. Their answer was quiet but resolute: build a line through the women who embodied the values they had fought to protect. It had once included Diana. In fact, Diana had been deeply considered a key figure in that lineage until her tragic passing left a painful void. For years, the plan was suspended in silence. And then Catherine arrived. Young, steady, thoughtful Lady Sarah later confessed she had watched Catherine for years from the sidelines, looking for signs. Not of perfection, but of strength, of restraint, of respect for tradition. When Alexandra handed over the jewels, it wasn't the beginning, it was the final act of a legacy carefully guarded across generations. Not long after the jewel handover, Catherine was invited by Lady Sarah for a quiet afternoon tea. No cameras, no aides, just the two of them, behind closed doors. What happened during those hours remains unrecorded, but what emerged from it changed everything. Catherine left with more than just words. She was entrusted with rare archival photographs of the Queen Mother, personal notes scribbled in her unmistakable hand, and fragments of thought never meant for the public, a direct, unbroken thread from one queen to another. It was a moment both sacred and staggering. It was also the moment Catherine finally understood the full weight of what she had inherited: not just jewels, not just trust, but the final wishes of three royal matriarchs. According to one palace aide, Lady Sarah described the meeting as the true coronation not of title, but of purpose. It was then, in private, that the legacies of Elizabeth, Margaret and Alexandra merged into one path forward, all of it handed, quietly and irrevocably, to Catherine. The symbolic merging of wills wasn't written into law, but it didn't need to be. Within the royal family, symbolism can be more powerful than decree. And with that final gesture, Catherine became more than a royal figure. She became the vessel of memory, of resilience, of intention. And yet, the legacy of jewels wasn't just symbolic, it came with buried power, secrets, and a clause that would shock even Charles. Buried deep within a locked drawer in Alexandra's estate was a codicil, a hidden addendum attached to the Queen Mother's private testament. Though never made public, it legally altered the course of inheritance, and it dealt Camilla a brutal blow she couldn't recover from. It was discovered during a routine health review of Alexandra's estate, when one of her longtime solicitors began preparing for a potential transfer of assets. At first, it was thought to be just another archived document, yellowed and long forgotten. But when the envelope was unsealed and read, everything changed. The Queen Mother's unmistakable handwriting and a dated royal seal confirmed its authenticity. The codicil was short but devastatingly clear. It stated that her most personal items, those she considered untouched by protocol, were not to be passed through the line of succession, but rather to a future queen who was, in her words, born outside scandal and embraced by legacy. That sentence, written in private decades earlier, rewrote the rules Camilla thought were hers to command. Legal experts were quickly called in. The language, while elegantly old-fashioned, left little room for argument. Though not part of the official Crown estate or public bequeathments, the jewels in question fell under the Queen Mother's private possessions, giving her full legal authority to assign them as she wished. And she had. Camilla's name was nowhere in the clause. In fact, the wording all but disqualified her. The phrase "born outside scandal" echoed like a gavel strike. Catherine, with her unblemished record and quiet strength, fit the description. Camilla, entangled in decades of royal controversy, did not. Charles was briefed. The revelation placed him in an impossible position. To challenge the codicil meant not only provoking legal scrutiny, but disrespecting a document penned by his own grandmother. Advisors warned him. A legal battle would be a disaster. Catherine's public image, bolstered by years of steady grace, would only be strengthened by such an attack. In the court of public opinion, Camilla was already on fragile ground. In the court of law, she had no standing. Charles, reluctant but resigned, chose silence. He gave no statement, made no objection. It was quiet compliance, but compliance nonetheless. Catherine, now holding not only the Queen Mother's jewels but the legal validation to keep them, became untouchable. Even Camilla's most loyal allies knew the line had been drawn. But the palace wasn't done trying to contain the fallout. Behind closed doors, efforts were made to suppress the codicil. Lawyers from Clarence House and Buckingham Palace scrambled to prevent its details from reaching the public, but they underestimated the resolve of Lady Sarah. Quietly, but deliberately, she leaked the document's existence to a well-respected royal historian. Within days, excerpts appeared in trusted publications, confirming the legitimacy of the codicil and the Queen Mother's final wishes. Camilla's campaign to reclaim the jewels was over, not through scandal or scandalous defeat, but through the cold finality of law. A single sentence, written in secrecy, had collapsed the foundation she'd tried to build for years. The monarchy, now bound by that legal truth, could no longer pretend neutrality. The jewels weren't just symbols of a bygone era, they were now the instruments of judgment. And Catherine had emerged, not only chosen by sentiment, but crowned by the very words of a matriarch who had once ruled the shadows. But even as the law sided with Catherine, the crown's future still hung in the balance until Charles made one final, silent gesture. He didn't speak. He didn't sign. But in a quiet moment at a royal gala, King Charles allowed one image to be captured: Catherine, wearing the Queen Mother's brooch, standing beside him with his hand gently placed behind her back. In royal language, it was a thunderclap. It was a calculated silence, the kind the monarchy has mastered over centuries. But for those fluent in the unspoken rituals of the crown, the message was deafening. There, under the chandeliers of a formal state event, Catherine stepped into the spotlight not through words or declaration, but through presence. The brooch pinned just beneath her collarbone was unmistakable, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, one of the Queen Mother's most cherished heirlooms. It hadn't been worn publicly in decades. Its sudden reappearance was not a coincidence. It was a sign. And the hand on her back? That was Charles's final word on the matter, unspoken, yet irreversible. Camilla stood behind them, several paces removed from the center. The official photographs were merciless in their framing. What once may have been dismissed as ceremonial choreography now carried political consequence. Royal watchers and experts pored over the imagery with laser focus. No formal announcement had been made, no press release issued, but the symbolism was so deliberate, so precise, that interpretation became unavoidable. The king, by royal instinct and ancestral calculation, had shown the world who now carried the Queen Mother's spirit forward. It was not his wife, it was his daughter-in-law. Within hours, the tabloids erupted. Headlines from London to Sydney screamed variations of the same message: the people's future queen has arrived. Social media flooded with side-by-side comparisons: Catherine in the brooch, beside images of the Queen Mother in her prime. The public didn't need convincing, the narrative had written itself. Dignified, patient, powerful, without demanding it. And as for Camilla, her name was curiously missing from the next ceremonial event's attendance list. When questions were raised, no comment was offered. Silence, once again, told the entire story. Inside the royal residences, particularly Sandringham, tension reached a boiling point. According to palace insiders, a confrontation between Charles and Camilla left the walls echoing with voices not usually raised. Camilla felt betrayed not just by Charles, but by the institution she had fought so hard to be part of. And in a moment of quiet retreat, she left Sandringham alone, refusing to be photographed, her absence speaking louder than her presence ever could. But no matter the behind-the-scenes fallout, the damage or transformation, depending on who you asked, was done. Catherine's image in the sapphire brooch became a modern royal relic, a symbol of passage, of power gently handed and publicly recognized. It was the culmination of months of silent warfare, strategic restraint, and generational loyalty. She hadn't spoken a word, but the world now listened to her every move. In royal circles, she was no longer preparing for the future, she was the future. But the final twist wouldn't come from the palace. It came from the vault beneath Windsor, in a diary that had been sealed for decades. In the Queen Mother's final diary entry, she wrote of jewels, of duty, and of a woman she'd never meet. Give them to the one who remembers who we were. And now, with Catherine stepping into destiny and Camilla fading into shadows, those words carry a haunting finality. The diary was uncovered by accident during a scheduled restoration of Windsor's private archives, a room long sealed to all but the most trusted historians. As shelves were cleared and volumes dusted, a slim leather-bound book fell loose from behind a chest of correspondence. Its pages, delicate but intact, carried the final thoughts of a woman who had witnessed the monarchy through its most volatile eras. The date? Just weeks before her passing. The handwriting? Distinctly hers. It wasn't a public memoir or a formal letter, it was personal, intimate. A confession whispered to the future, and buried within those final pages was the sentence that would echo across generations: give them to the one who remembers who we were. Palace archivists, sworn to discretion, were left stunned by the poetic precision of her words. It wasn't just about heirlooms, it was about memory, about principle, about soul. The Queen Mother hadn't named Catherine, because she couldn't have, but her description painted a portrait too vivid to ignore. Not the loudest voice she had written, but the clearest. Not the one who demands place, but the one who earns it in silence. In that moment, the connection between Catherine and the Queen Mother was no longer theoretical, it was spiritual. Catherine hadn't just inherited jewelry, she had inherited a belief system, a legacy rooted not in entitlement, but in endurance. When news of the diary broke, the public response was instant and overwhelming. Tributes poured in from around the world, not just to the Queen Mother, but to Catherine, whose quiet grace had suddenly been cast in a powerful new light. Artists painted interpretations of the phrase, writers dedicated essays to its meaning. Social media turned the quote into a movement, with thousands using the words to celebrate women who stood with dignity in the shadows and still changed history. The image of Catherine, standing with Charles, wearing the Queen Mother's sapphire, now carried a deeper meaning. It was no longer just a symbol of continuity, but of prophecy fulfilled. Inside palace walls, the diary shifted the atmosphere entirely. For decades, scandal had split the monarchy at its seams. But in this moment, sealed in handwriting, sealed in spirit, a fracture had been healed. The monarchy had not been salvaged by decree, nor by protocol, but by the invisible tether of legacy passed through chosen hands, not by blood, but by belief. Catherine had become the vessel not of ambition, but of remembrance, a queen not yet crowned, but already carrying the weight of those who came before. And so, the jewels did more than dazzle, they told the story of a crown reborn, not by tradition, but by silent rebellion, and the women who dared to guard it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.